I am going to introduce you to Dr. Stephen Enloe, who will be doing his speech on tricky situations for invasive plant control. All right, take over. It's all yours.
Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm really happy to be here. I've worked with master gardeners now for almost 20 years in my career, spanning across multiple states from Wyoming to Alabama to now Florida. Worked on a lot of different invasive plants, but I love my master gardener audiences because they got the real grit and determination to get things done, and they know how to make things beautiful. So I'm happy to be here today. Now, the talk is a little tricky, but I'm going to cover several different things here and not just tricky situations. I'm going to talk about sort of what's new on invasive plant lists and give you a couple of updates there. I'm going to give you a glyphosate update because this is something that has been near and really important for a lot of master gardeners. And then I'm going to get into two really tricky species, golden pothos and arrowhead vine, two escaped ornamentals. We'll follow that with Q&A because I know that many of you may have specific invasive plant questions that I do not cover today, but I want to get you your answers because you're here for that, and I definitely want for you to walk away with something good. So I've got you for the next hour or 50 minutes or so, so here we go. Okay, first off, regarding plant list updates. Now, what's important to remember here in Florida, we have three primary lists that people are aware of but may often confuse. The first is the Florida Invasive Species Council invasive plant list, and that was formerly the FLEPC, or Florida Exotic Pest Plant Council list of Category 1 and 2 species. Always remember that is a non-regulatory list, and it is a list put together by experts in the field to really let folks know what they consider to be some of the most troublesome plants we have. We then have the IFAS assessment, which is a regulatory list for IFAS only, so that limiting IFAS folks' ability to recommend plants if they sort of fail the IFAS assessment that's run by Dr. Dia Lorenz. And that's a risk assessment, basically. And then finally, the list that has the most teeth legally, which is the Florida Department of Ag and Consumer Services, their noxious weed list. That is truly state regulatory, and the one that has legal ramifications in terms of buying, selling, importing, or moving species that are on that list. So what's going on with these three lists? Well, first and foremost, the FLEPC, or Florida Invasive Species Council list, is put out and updated every 2 years. The last one was 2019. I checked with the plant list committee. As of this week, the 2021 update is not quite out yet. But I was informed that there are not likely to be any new plants going on the 2021 list of invasive plant species. So it'll look very similar to the 2019 list. There's about 165 species between category 1 and 2. That's plenty to worry about. But the committee continues to meet and will continue to do so and put new plants on as they deem appropriate. Now, given the fact that there's no real new species coming onto the FLEPC list to talk about, or the FISC list, I should call it, there are some fundamental realities. And the reality is Brazilian pepper tree, which has historically had a southern distribution in the peninsula, is definitely moving northwards. And I want you all to know that pepper tree was just found over in the Panhandle on Eglin Air Force Base back in August of this year. So pepper tree is on the move. And so old species that have been around a long time, we're definitely seeing more and more move in a northwards and northwestern expansion in their range. We've seen pepper tree all the way up into southeast Georgia, and we definitely are now seeing it in the Panhandle. And so this is one that you really need to be aware of if you're over in the Panhandle. If you don't believe me, ask anybody from the peninsula. All right. And in terms of locally throughout the state, what I encourage you to do is get on the FloridaInvasives.org website, which is the Florida Invasive Species Partnership. Check out the local CISMAs, the Cooperative Invasive Species Management Areas, and go to their web pages, and you should be able to find watch lists of species for each of the CISMAs that we have representing every single county within the state of Florida. So I've got the map there. Go to FloridaInvasives.org and you can click on your local CISMA. You feel free to get interested and join it. You can contact Emily Bell for more information. but most of those systems should have watch lists, and the northern ones certainly do, so that you can sort of be paying attention for what species to be watching out for. Okay. All right, now moving on to the IFAS assessment run by Dr. De Lorenz. Now, the assessment is an incredible resource we have here in the state of Florida, and there's really no other state that has anything like this. We have dedicated folks working hard to assess the potential invasiveness of lots and lots of species, including many horticultural species here in the state. So recently, Cassia bakeriana was just run through the IFAS assessment. This is pink cassia, or pink shower tree, a very beautiful ornamental tree, short-statured. And so Dia ran that through the assessment, and the good news is it posed a low invasion risk for central, north, and south parts of the state. And so it is not considered a problem at this time and may be recommended by IFAS, and will be reassessed in the next 10 years from now, unless something prompted a more rapid assessment. So this is a great example of the assessment working and demonstrating, hey, we're not here to ban all species. We actually take a hard look at these things, and Cassia bakeriana is come out okay. And so this is good news. Elaeocarpus decipiens, or Japanese blueberry tree, was another species that was brought into question. And so Dr. Lorenz ran that through the assessment. And the good news for Japanese blueberry tree is that it has low invasion risk, and it's not considered a problem species at this time. It'll be again considered in the next 10 years. But the good news is it's another species IFAS can recommend that we have utilized the best science available to assess its invasiveness, and it's found not to be a problem now. So yay, the assessment hit another one that's a very beautiful tree. Now, concerning a couple of other species and sort of transitioning from the assessment over to the Florida Department of Ag and Consumer Services noxious weed list, here we have Lonicera japonica, or Japanese honeysuckle. It's a species many of us know well, predominant across the deep south. And this is a species that has come up with a high invasion risk, and we've known this for a long time. However, it was just moved to the Florida noxious weed list. So Japanese honeysuckle is now a prohibited species, according to the Florida Department of Ag and Consumer Services. So no more sale, transport of Japanese honeysuckle. And this is one that's sort of overdue to be placed upon that list. Additionally, Vitex rotundifolia, also known as beech vitex, we've known it's been very invasive from a lot of what we've seen over on the coast of South Carolina. But we've recently begun to find it popping up along the coast of Florida, especially over in the Panhandle. Beech vitex, a beautiful plant, very salt tolerant, dune stabilizer. Unfortunately, does not stay where it's planted and has rapidly spread and can cause major problems within our coastal dune communities. It also has been moved from over to the noxious weed list for the state. So beech vitex now officially a prohibited noxious weed. Now, a couple more that are moving towards the noxious weed list is one that this group is probably very familiar with, camphor tree, Cinnamomum camphora. And this species is definitely known to be invasive within the north and central regions of the state, and is actually now moving through committee to move on to the FDAC's noxious weed list. So this one will likely be moved over relatively soon, I suspect. There has to be approval for that, but I think it's going to move through the process without a whole lot of problem. The same thing for Pyrus calreana, which is a calorie pear. We often call it Bradford pear. That's a cultivar of calreana. But when cultivars get together, we get the wild type, and it's become extraordinarily invasive across the eastern United States. This is one we see very commonly escaping across the panhandle of Florida, and is very problematic. And so that one is now moved to the Florida noxious weed list. So that sort of wraps up plant list tidbits for you. I hope you found that useful and a little bit informative there. And so now we want to move into the next section of the talk, where I'm going to quickly chat about the status of glyphosate. Now, glyphosate is something that I've studied my entire career of almost 20 years. And it's only been in the last 5 years when the lawsuits began asserting that glyphosate caused cancer, that we've taken a look at this again and spent a whole lot of time looking into glyphosate over the last 5 years. So a lot has happened, multiple lawsuits have occurred, and you're probably very familiar with those. But as of right now, here's kind of the legal status of glyphosate. Bayer, the company now responsible for glyphosate, who purchased Monsanto during this whole process, continues to maintain glyphosate is safe. However, they have officially settled about 75% of the cases that were brought against them. And that number was exceeding 120,000 lawsuits and claims against Bayer. So they've done a tremendous amount, paid out almost $10 billion for those current claims for folks who claimed their non-Hodgkin's lymphoma was caused by the use of glyphosate products. So that has happened. However, this is not the end of it. There are new trials that are looming despite Bayer's settlement efforts. So you may have heard of one recently. Bayer had lost 3 major trials. They actually recently won one in California, but there are many, many trials still lined up against Bayer regarding glyphosate and cancer. So from a legal perspective, we're likely to continue to hear about these things in the news as this moves forward. Now, what's more important is not what Bayer is saying, because I'm not here to defend a company. I'm not here to defend glyphosate. But the EPA has reviewed glyphosate, has re-reviewed glyphosate, and has come to the conclusion that glyphosate is not likely to be a carcinogen causing cancer. It has not mandated any changes to any glyphosate herbicide labels at this time. So, despite what we've seen in the court system, the EPA has said we stand by our reviews of glyphosate and its safety. And if you utilize it according to the label, it is not likely to cause cancer. So that's the EPA stand, and that's exactly what we in IFAS are also the stand that we are taking based upon our own assessments of glyphosate and everything in the risk assessment that the EPA has done. Now, we have also seen in Florida a number of public places have banned the use of glyphosate. You can see the list on the right there. A number of cities, some counties have banned it. And we've seen a lot of headlines in newspapers and media headlines across the state regarding these types of bans. They usually get quite a bit of attention when a ban like this goes into place. But what does this ban mean, actually? Okay, it actually means that glyphosate will no longer be used on any public county or city properties. Okay, it is not a stop sale, meaning the products have been banned from sale within the stores. It is simply that glyphosate will not be part of the integrated weed management plans that are utilized by cities and counties who have chosen to discontinue its use. So that's what the ban actually means. Okay, it's not a stop sale, simply a discontinue of use in those specific places. Now, there is some very other interesting things that are transpiring, and one of those is that Bayer has announced it will remove glyphosate from the U.S. lawn and garden market. So we're talking about glyphosate sold in the box stores and other sort of residential lawn and market type places. This is pretty a massive announcement they made, slated to begin in about 2023. A couple of years from now, we'll see how that pans out. But Bayer has made this announcement, has announced regarding this. And so what does this actually mean for the consumers and for master gardeners? So, historically, we've gone to the box stores and other places and taken a look at the weed management, the herbicide shelf, and you see a whole slew of products that have this Roundup trade name on them. And you look closely and you'll see some differences among some of those products. Some of those are glyphosate alone at different concentrations. Some are ready-to-use formulations. Others have a second active ingredient in them, like the extended control products that have some soil residual activity. And so there's quite a bit. Others are fast-acting and have a contact-type herbicide, possibly diquat or pelargonic acid included within them to get really fast activity. But the bottom line is we've seen a diversity of Roundup products, all containing glyphosate, almost all, for several years now. So the Roundup name is not going to go away. It's just not going to contain glyphosate in residential use products. So we're still going to see a whole bunch of Roundup type products likely on the box store shelves. It's just that glyphosate will be replaced with other active ingredients. Now this is really interesting, and it is likely to cause massive product confusion after the release of all of these things without good education. So it's going to be really important to pay very close attention if you are looking for herbicides for different vegetation control types and you've been used to using Roundup and buying it from the box stores. You need to very closely look at the active ingredients down the road because they're going to change. It's likely to be products that have diquat, and you might know that from Reward herbicide, which is a contact. It might be other contacts like pelargonic acid or other contact type materials. There may even be an acetic acid type product. They may even have a 2,4-D type product, a more systemic translocating material, possibly some triclopyr. And there may be others. Bayer has not announced what those active ingredients are going to be. The bottom line, though, is the Roundup you pick up off the shelf in 2023 may not control the species you're targeting with the new active ingredients it has. So it's going to be very important to educate yourself and look very closely on the labels to see exactly what's in them and exactly what species they are saying it will control. Okay? Again, within IFAS, nothing's changed. Stewardship is our message. Glyphosate can be a useful tool. We're not going to force it on anybody, and if you choose not to use it, we are totally okay with that. And however, the EPA has not changed any labels, and we are confident in the findings of the EPA, but we are also open to more science, to a better understanding of glyphosate. If we begin to see the carcinogenicity data change for glyphosate, and it becomes a serious concern, then we will be the ones waving the flag saying, hey, we got a problem here. This data is not lining up, and we don't think you should be using it anymore. So bottom line, if you're going to use it, follow the label, be a good steward, and take very strong precautions and be very responsible in your use of it. And if you choose not to use it and utilize other approaches, then absolutely fine with that. In terms of other alternatives, we have put out a couple of different documents here in IFAS that are glyphosate herbicide alternatives. Dr. Chris Marble led the effort for herbicide alternatives for weed control in Florida landscape planting beds. He's done a great job with that document, very good descriptions of all sorts of other alternatives to glyphosate within that document. I've led a document for integrated management of non-native plants in natural areas of Florida that has a number of alternatives to glyphosate for many different species. And so in terms of invasive plants in natural areas. So we do have information out there for alternatives. And if you're looking for those, these are a couple of really good places to start. All right. So let's now move into the next part of this talk because I want to talk about a couple of species that may be near and dear to the hearts of many master gardeners that you may have used over the years. You may still have them, golden pothos and arrowhead vine. And these are two species that are ornamentals, climbing vines that have been utilized in a lot of climbing vine type situations for many, many years now. That typically have a peninsular distribution, with golden pothos being a little more southern relegated than arrowhead vine, which is a little further north. Both of these are problematic now and very, very invasive. And so let's talk about them a little bit. So they both belong to the Araceae. This is the arum family, and we like to call these the aroids, which is one of my favorite plant families of all time. I just absolutely love it. There's about 3,750 known species within this family, and it is really most famous for one plant, and that is the Titan arum, Amorphophallus titanium. And this is one that makes the news every time one of these Titan arums blooms in a botanical conservatory. They're really amazing, beautiful plants. But in terms of on the invasive side, we don't have a lot of invasive plants within the Araceae, but we do have some very notable ones. Wild taro, elephant ear, water lettuce are three others along with golden pothos and arrowhead vine. And those five comprise pretty much the troublesome Araceae and the whole family here in Florida and a lot of tropical, subtropical areas across the world. Okay, so when we talk about pothos and arrowhead vine, it's not just here in the U.S. that they can be problematic. They have been exported worldwide and are invasive in other tropical areas too. So it's not just a U.S. problem. Now, golden pothos, also known as the devil's ivy, centipede tonga vine, the genus and specific epithet Epiprimnum pinnatum, and with CV aureum. This is a plant that originally was endemic to a very small area in the Maori and the Society Islands. That is an area of the South Pacific about 6,000 kilometers from Australia. So if you want to be a plant out in the middle of nowhere, this is one that was doing just fine. So it was collected on some early botanical expeditions, and it was really, really valued for as its role as a very exotic type species, which early horticultural species, it was often all about things that looked very exotic. And so widely cultivated as an ornamental. It's been a fantastic house plant. And the juvenile leaves make very, very good climbing house plants, and folks tend to put it up and run it up all inside houses and well-lit areas, and it looks great. It was introduced by the USDA in 1974. And again, is one of the most popular ornamentals out there. It is not currently on the Florida noxious weed list. So you will find it on the FLEPSI list, but you will not find it on the noxious weed list. Arrowhead vine is native a whole lot closer to home here. This is native to Latin America, from Mexico to Bolivia. And, so it's not that far away in its native range. However, it was very quickly, cultivated and exported all over the world. And this is one of the most popular, selling ornamentals of all time, I think. The first herbarium specimen for this one was documented in Brevard County in 1966. So this is one where Pandora's box got opened pretty early, and we've been seeing it as problematic, for the last 50 to 60 years. Again, these are climbing vines, both of them are. I got a couple of pictures here of pothos, and you can see folks would often plant it and utilize that very unique climbing growth with the very large leaves. Very beautiful, often variegated as a nice accent. However, unfortunately, these plants readily propagate by stem cuttings. And so anybody doing any type of landscape clearing work who takes these things and throws them over the back fence or dumps them out, you're likely to spread the problem that way. So we talk to master gardeners, we talk to other groups, be a good steward, and don't dump your plant cuttings in places that they could escape out into natural areas and begin to cause problems. One of the major places that both of these species have become a problem at is on the Loxahatchee River down in southeastern Florida. Now, if you've never kayaked the Lox River, I cannot tell you enough to get out there and do this. It is an amazing kayaking experience. It's a beautiful, beautiful river and a wonderful, wonderful experience. But you will see these species along that kayaking trip because this has really gotten out on the floodplain of the Loxahatchee River. And this is what it looks like along the river on the floodplain now. We see large areas that are dense, almost monotypic stands of arrowhead vine and golden pothos, where it forms a very dense ground cover, that can be 2 to 3 feet deep, and then runs up every single cypress tree, ash tree, and other trees on the river, encompassing them within a very, very dense cover. So yes, this is a classic invasive, and it does the things invasives do. Forms very dense stands, shades and smothers out other vegetation, and it sort of just eliminates all of the native plants in the floodplain there, and puts that tremendous amount of weight climbing up those trees. They're going to make them much more subject to wind throw if we have a hurricane type conditions. So here's some pictures of golden pothos doing the same thing. Yes, it will do this if you haven't seen this before. It will form very dense monotypic stands, covering everything and smothering, climbing up trees, forming very dense cover. So they are both extremely problematic and very invasive, largely from propagated cuttings or stem cuttings that have been improperly disposed of. So how do we deal with these species? How do we get rid of them? This is an awful situation. I mean, if you're looking at this situation or this situation, first off, the task is going to be monumental. Now, with invasive vines, the first thing people often ask is, well, can I just cut them? Can I sever their connection with the ground? And the vines up the trees, I assume, will then die, correct? So the question comes for these two species, does poodle cutting, as we like to call it, which works really well for Lygodium, or world climbing fern, or Japanese climbing fern, which cannot tolerate poodle cutting above, does this work for these two species? And the reality is not that well. These have tremendous aerial roots, and they send these adventitious roots down to the ground. So you will see both climbing stems and adventitious roots rooting in. But if you cut all of those and poodle cut this like you see here, where we've cut it and stripped all that growth back, severing the upper vines from the roots, you will find that these vines often survive with no problem, with no connection to the ground. They're capable of taking in moisture through the aerial roots and surviving for a long time. They then proceed to initiate new roots downward. So you can see these roots growing down from the cut stems, and these will quickly make it back to the ground and reconnect the plants with the ground itself. So a single poodle cutting event alone, no, does not completely solve everything that's growing up into the trees. So unfortunately, yeah, it doesn't work the same as for old world climbing fern and some other vines. This is very discouraging and frustrating for folks who have tried this and seen these things rapidly regrow. All right, so the next question comes, well, I've got this stuff up the trees, I want to get rid of it. So is there an herbicide I can use? And we talk about cut stump applications or cut stem applications as being a very common approach for a lot of invasive plants, a very safe and selective way. And so can I actually cut stem those? Well, it turns out it's very, very difficult to effectively squirt these reverse cut stems, so the upper cut stem surface of a cut vine, with an herbicide. It's extremely difficult to take a squirt bottle and selectively put it on that. And if you try it, you're likely to get herbicide all over yourself and all over the tree and all over everything. And I don't recommend using squirt bottles to do a reverse cut stem treatment. However, there are other tools out there, and here's where some of the new things come in. There are foamers, and I don't know if you're familiar with herbicide foamers, but this is a herbicide foamer produced from Green Shoots, which is a company out of Wisconsin. And I'm not here to sell their product, but I'm just giving you that as an example, where you can take a glyphosate product, add a little surfactant and water to that, and it generates a very beautiful foam. So what you can see here on the picture on the right is right off their website, foaming the top of a cut stump with the herbicide solution. The foam maintains itself for a few minutes. It doesn't last that long. It's not a permanent foam. It bubbles down and eventually goes away, but the solution itself is retained very nicely within that foamed area. And so you don't see a whole lot of runoff, and you don't see any mist going off site to cause non-target damage. And so I've worked with these foamers for several years now, and I kind of like them. They're very nice for master gardeners and for homeowners. You can mix very small amounts and do a whole lot of squirts with them on cut stems of different things, and it tends to work pretty well. So what you can see on the left here, again, this would be, say, after the foam was applied. It's already gone away, but the blue dye in there shows you that it has been retained very nicely on that cut surface right there, okay? So we wanted to ask the question, can we actually kill pothos and syngonium growing up trees using a type of foamer product like this? We also said, well, what if you don't want to buy the foamer, but can we just take and cut those and actually dip the cut stems into a herbicide solution and actually get them to kill the stems all the way up the trees? So we did this, and we did this down the Loxahatchee River on tons and tons of trees using both a foamer with a 50% glyphosate volume to volume concentration there from the foamer, and just dipping the cut stems and roots, aerial roots, into a little cup that had a solution of the herbicide in it for about a 2-second dip. So just getting a decent dip in there, holding it for another 2 seconds to let anything drip off back into the cup, and then pulling it out. And so what did we find when we did this type of cut stem approach? Well, this was really interesting things we're finding here. For syngonium, cutting only, so if we did a poodle cut with no herbicide, 60 days after treatment, we still have 42% cover of green pothos or green syngonium running up the trees. Where we used the cut with the foamer, so we cut everything and then foam treated the uppercut stems, we only had an 11% green cover of syngonium and where we cut and dipped, we were down to 5%. So in 60 days, we're seeing tremendous reductions within the live green cover of Syngonium by utilizing this reverse cut foam applicator or dipping it into a cup of 50% glyphosate solution. So that's kind of cool. And there's pictures on the right there. This is my biologist, Coral Foster, involved in this work. And this is one of the nice examples of Syngonium that has had a cut stem treatment put on it, the foaming and or the dip treatments. And you can see that we have defoliated these things, but you can see some green stems there. And so we are waiting to see if these things are going to continue to die. But overall, we're initially getting good defoliation with both the foamer approach and the dipping approach. With pothos, very similar results, about 45% live green cover of the trees. With the foamer, we're down to 6%, and with a dip treatment, down to about 2%. So really, really neat results in terms of reducing the growth of the live pothos and Syngonium of those trees utilizing this reverse cut stem approach. Now, we have done this on one major project on the river. It needs to be repeated. So I'm not saying this is the absolute way to go. We're likely to run into some situations where it may work really great or may not work quite as well. But this is some of our initial results that we're seeing some promising to this technique. Okay, for foliar treatments, really there's not a lot that works great on pothos or Syngonium. A real hot concentration of a glyphosate product, like a 5% solution for a spot treatment. Triclopyr, the amine formulation in terms of the brush killer type products at the box stores. Follow the label exactly for that for foliar treatments. But I will tell you that repeat treatments are going to be required with both of these because it is almost impossible to effectively control all of the layered stems of either of these species when it's a dense ground cover, okay? All right, so what about hand removal? So say you don't want to use any herbicides at all, and we're okay with that, and we like to do research to understand exactly what it takes to do hand removal. What if you want to pull it out of the trees and hand pull everything on the ground to control it? So we've actually done the research, and we've had contractor research where we get contractors to come out and do this for us. And then we measure a whole lot of the variables and attributes about their work and to really understand exactly how much time it's going to take and what it's going to be. Now, a quick note about hand pulling of either of these species. They both contain what are called raphides or raphides. These are calcium oxalate crystals. They're very small. And they can cause a very painful stinging and burning in the mouth and throat. Now, so you don't want to be sucking on the sap of these things, but if you get it in your eyes, these raphides can cause significant eye injury too. Raphides are well known from history through Dieffenbachia, aka was known as dumb cane, which was used to torture and punish slaves back many years ago. So unfortunately, they have a very dark history, but the raphides responsible for the pain actually are contained within both of these species. Now, I've never had a trouble with either of them. I've gotten the sap on me, but that's just me, and I strongly recommend good personal protective equipment in terms of long sleeves, gloves, and eye protection if you're going to be really doing a lot of work hand removal of these plants. So basically on the river, we were dealing with live cover pre-removal. Pothos was about 50% live cover on this study, and Syngonium was almost 100% on the river. And the vine heights were about 12 feet for pothos up the trees, and it was about almost 20 to 24 feet up the trees for the Syngonium. So these were some pretty good stands of both species. The Syngonium was a lot thicker and growing a lot higher up in the trees at the time of these studies, though. So this is an example of a 6-person crew hand pulling and removing all the Syngonium from the ground, so pulling it up and then actually pulling it down out of the trees too. So a complete site clearance of the species. So you can see they're almost finished with this 10 by 10 meter plot, and they're bagging everything up to dispose of it. So guess what we found? In terms of time, it took about almost 80 minutes for them to clear a single 10 by 10 meter plot of golden pothos on the left there. That is an equivalent to about 48 hours per acre. So it would take somebody about a week to clear out an acre of golden pothos growing on the ground with a 6-person crew if you were to take that approach. With Syngonium, it was even worse. It was about 96 hours per acre. It took about 120 minutes to control a 10 by 10 or to fully remove a 10 by 10 meter plot. So you saw all that incredible biomass that they're dealing with there, and it takes a long time to hand pull these things. But this is the first quantitative data that has ever been generated regarding what it takes to hand remove both of these species. So it can be done, but you're going to be in for some significant labor costs if you want to go about this. Or if you can do it yourself on very small patches, yes, they can be hand removed. Now, there's a lot of biomass that comes with these. When it takes that long to pull all that stuff up, they recovered about 5 tons per acre of biomass from those plots, which was incredible for golden pothos. For Syngonium, it was about 20 tons per acre, or about 40,000 pounds per acre of Syngonium. Now, that is what I call an extreme case, really an extreme scenario. It's a tremendous amount of biomass on the river there. The pothos is likely more realistic. But the bottom line is that's a lot of biomass, 10,000 pounds. And this is what it looked like when they pulled out of there on the trailer to take and dispose of this, all bagged to be removed. So the bottom line is it worked. All right, 60 days after treatment, you can see in the foreground here, the arrowhead vine is gone. There is a few resprouts because it will be inevitable no matter what. That there will always be a few little pieces you miss. Right now would be a fantastic time to go back in, hand pull, hand remove, dig out those resprouts that you missed. And I think that we will have incredible control. I won't call it eradication, but this is absolutely phenomenal success in terms of a hand pulling program, just extremely labor intensive. All right, so it works. Now, a couple more pointers on physical removal because a lot of folks may want to do this. We've done a lot of research on different blades, and very sharp machetes work very well. Pointed curved blade knives like the karambit knife in the middle bottom there works well, or even a linoleum knife on the bottom right that's very sharp works well. Or a simple pair of pruning shears like the ones on the left there, that you can actually get those behind the stems growing up the trees, and you can cut these things very well. Now here's some examples of those types of cuts, and what you can see in all of these cases is I am cutting away from the trunk of the tree, away from my body, so that I don't pull the knife blade into my stomach, but that I am getting a nice clean cut, severing those vines from the trees with the single blade, or getting several stems at once by inserting a machete behind them, twisting it out, and slicing. So those two approaches have worked very well to protect the trees from blade damage, because this is exactly what we're trying to avoid in doing any vine removal from trees. You can see the damage on all of these trees where folks have hacked into the tree. We don't recommend that, so always cut out and away from the trunk of the tree to avoid this type of damage, and make sure you're cutting away from pulling the blade away from your body and not into your body when you're doing that. Now, we found a lot of ugly trees after we started removing these, and palms are probably the worst. When these things get into palm trees, they're extremely difficult to get that biomass because they intertwine with the leaf sheaths, they grow behind the sheaths, and they create such a humid environment at the base of those trees, all of those older sheaths begin to rot. And so the base of the palms can actually look pretty rough when you begin to pull all this biomass off, but it will show you just what the condition of your trees truly are. And so I think it's a good idea to get it off of there. So bottom line for these species, hey, I think we've got some promising results here with multiple techniques. The foamer for reverse cut stem, the dip treatments, they are working with a 50% glyphosate solution. It's very slow, and it may take some additional effort, but at least it's a good start for defoliating a lot of that material up into the trees. So we know the reverse cut stems work best on smaller vines, and extremely large pothos vines are probably going to be what is most challenging for this. And that is the one that is probably going to be the survivor that we're going to have to work harder on. Hand removal, it can work. It's extremely labor intensive, but we've had some success with that. A lot of biomass to deal with, but it can be done. And persistence and follow-up are definitely going to be required in any case for those two species. So with that, my hour, I do believe, is just about up here. So thank you very much for your time this afternoon, and I'd be happy to end the presentation here and answer any questions about it or any other species that anyone is bringing to the chat bar. So I'm going to close this out, go back to the chat, and Ashley, do we have any questions today?
Yes, we do. All right, our first question was, do you have any suggestions for keeping Peruvian primrose willow under control in our wetlands?
Excellent question. The Peruvian primrose willow. So this is Ludwigia peruviana. It's a very shrubby with bright yellow flowers that has rapidly begun to spread throughout a lot of our wetlands here in Florida. We have several native Ludwigia species. This one is not native, and really begins to change the look, and it invades especially along water's edges. So this is a tough one. So it is extremely difficult to hand pull. It forms a very dense woody root crown. So once plants get established, you would have to dig those things out. It's going to be a lot of disturbance, typically at the water's edge. That's a very challenging approach. Repeated mowing will knock it back, but it doesn't completely eliminate it, as it will resprout below whatever your mowing height is, and will try to come back. We have no biocontrols for it. Herbicide-wise, we've seen some decent success with aquatic formulations only, okay, because it's going to be growing right on the water. So triclopyr products, the amine formulation has worked very well. Renovate is like a 2% solution. Clearcast herbicide, which is a professional product, it's pretty expensive. That's worked extremely well for Peruvian. And glyphosate alone will burn it down, but we'll typically see some resprouting with aquatic formulations of glyphosate. So that's three options there.
Okay, and to follow up with the primrose, how do you tell the difference between the native and the Peruvian primrose?
Oh, okay. So that one, we actually have a document that I will make available with the master gardeners regarding identification and separation of the primroses. It will often have to do with, of course, the fruits and then the flower characteristics. So I don't want to get into the detailed taxonomy there, but I will make available the document. Whoever's asking the question, please email it to me directly, and I will send you a really nice PDF for separating those, okay?
Awesome, excellent. Next question, since FDAX only updates their list about every 10 years or so, why don't they use the FISC list, which is updated every 2 years?
Excellent question. So there's a lot more that goes into the FDAX list than there is. The FISP list is put together by a number of experts, but who are assessing the invasive impacts of these plants on natural areas. FDAX has to assess a whole lot more things regarding economics. Is the plant currently sold in the industry? If we were to ban it, what would be the economic impact? And it's not that it has to be every 10 years. It's that when people petition for new species to be listed, that's really the way that FDAX changes that list. So if nobody's petitioning anything, yeah, it may be many, many years before it changes. But recently we've seen multiple petitions moving forward for adding species to it. So if you have species you'd like to add to it, then you can work with folks to go through that petition process, okay?
Great. Next question, what do you recommend for torpedo grass?
Torpedo grass. Okay, torpedo grass is a nightmare. So yes, clarification on what situation you're talking about. If it's in a lawn versus if it's growing along your pond edge or a water bodies type edge or a wetland situation. I can't really talk a whole lot about the turf situation. I would talk to our turf extension specialist or Brian Unruh to get their thoughts on the turf situation. In natural areas, we have very few choices. We have glyphosate as an option, or imazapyr herbicide. Imazapyr has a lot of soil activity and cannot be used and should not be used by most homeowners, not because it's not safe to you, but because it can kill oak trees. So that one we have to be very careful with. A third option, Cethoxidem. We have a special local needs label for tiger herbicide, which has some selective activity. That's the same as post herbicide, but it's an aquatic version of that we have within the state, which can provide some control of torpedo too.
Okay. I have, if you can remember, the first picture of the arrowhead vine that did not have arrow-shaped leaves. They say they know the leaves can
Yes, so
change shape as it gets older. They want to know if that was a picture of an older plant.
okay, so the variation within the leaf shape is pretty amazing, and yes, you will often see those leaves change tremendously, and so yeah, absolutely, and that can be a really confusing one for people when they only see the juvenile leaves, but yeah, definitely older leaves are often change substantially there. Okay.
Okay. How can you convince your neighbors to remove invasive seedlings such as camphor, etc.?
Oh, excellent question. So, education is the most important thing. First off, recognize that a lot of neighbors may not be aware of specific species as being invasive. And so, a very cordial, informative approach is the way to go there. That's worked in a lot of cases. Other cases, it's not. If they are noxious, you can encourage them to get rid of them because of that. Um, but please don't go and poison their trees. Whatever you do, don't go covert and poison trees. Nothing good will come of that. And unfortunately, work hard on the education side to endeavor to get it removed that way without going rogue.
Okay, great. And then do you have any suggestions for cat's claw?
Cat's claw. Oh my gosh. Okay. Cat's claw vine is one of the absolute worst problems we have. There's no question there. It is extremely difficult to control because it reproduces from seeds, from these underground tubers that layer right against the base of all your trees. Hand pulling, hand pulling, hand pulling to get as many of those and digging the tubers out if possible is probably going to lead to the longer term success. Every herbicide we've tried, we can burn it down, but it rapidly resprouts from the tubers. And so we have to be very careful when applying, especially that stuff that's growing up trees. If it's growing up the trees and you can pull it off the trees, spray it on the ground, I would probably recommend that with a pretty hot concentration of a glyphosate product. Would probably be the way I would go there.
Okay. What is the best way to get rid of camphor and your thoughts on using aquatic glyphosate?
Oh, yeah, camphor tree. Okay, that's two different questions. So camphor tree, cut stump treatments to remove the tree itself. I know that a lot of people are dealing with massively large camphor trees. They're going to have to be removed anyway. I don't like to leave giant dead standing trees, especially, in urban areas. If it's out in a natural area, a hack and squirt type approach can be very effective. But a cut stump treatments with a 50% solution of a professional triclopyr product like Garlon 3A, the amine formulation works very well. 50% solution of a glyphosate product can often work very well too. With those giant camphors, there's always going to be a few root sprouts coming back from those cut stumps, just about no matter what you do. But on smaller trees, the Garlon 3A at 50% is extremely effective. The aquatic herb glyphosate. So that, yes, we haven't really changed our position on it, but we really strive for stewardship, and we strive anyone using glyphosate in aquatic situations to review their weed management plans and assess alternatives to glyphosate to look for other herbicides that can do the job more selectively. And so we challenge everybody to review their plans, and if they can find options to not use glyphosate, then we think that's good stewardship. We know glyphosate has recently been detected in manatees, meaning that there's a lot of poor stewardship going on out there. And that's good. That's good science. It's good data. It's legitimate. And so, we really strive for people to be very good stewards when choosing to use glyphosate, especially in and around water. Okay.
Okay. How to control Asiatic jasmine that has crept in from your neighbors?
Oh boy. Okay. So the problem with creeping plants like this, it's always going to be coming in from your neighbors. Um, for bamboo, running bamboos, we talk about bamboo barriers, and if it's creeping in below ground and popping up, then installing a bamboo type barrier may be the way to go to sort of block those rhizomes, creeping underground stems from growing up. If it's coming over the fence, that's going to be a you and a neighbor issue, and continuously cutting it back, and reminding them about the problem and telling them you need to control the stuff on your side and they need to keep it on their side. That communication is really important, because if you go spray years with glyphosate, you could likely see some, kill back onto their side, and you could start a feud that way. So be very careful on those situations. But if you can put a barrier in the ground to prevent the below ground spread, that's probably the best thing you can do.
How to get rid of Tradescantia
Tradescantia, yes. So this is Tradescantia fluminensis. So the old common name for it, one of them was wandering Jew. That's a really, not necessarily a politically correct common name these days, but Tradescantias are ornamentals. They've been utilized for a long time, but they love wetland areas. So we've seen some non-chemical means of sort of raking the mat up and hand pulling. So as a first step, we've been able to knock it way back with hand pulling. It will recover from it, and you have to follow up pretty intensively if you're going to do that. It forms a very dense layer, and herbicide-wise, several different herbicides will sort of knock it back, including a glyphosate, 2,4-D products. I think have worked okay on that. A triclopyr has worked okay. The mats are so deep on that, oftentimes it does require multiple treatments to get it all. If it's a small patch and you can rake it out, that's a really good first step. You got to dispose of all that material, though, and then possibly do some spot treatments after that.
Okay. How about skunk vine, strangler vine, and Caesar weed?
Oh my gosh. Okay. How many more questions do we have here, by the way?
About 3 more.
Okay. So skunk vine. Okay, Padaria. So we've got skunk vine and sewer vine. They stink like crazy. If you hand pull those, my gosh, wear gloves and long sleeves and everything, or you're going to be smelling bad for a while. So with skunk vine, probably the most selective herbicide we have found is Milestone. So Milestone herbicide, it's you're not going to find it in the box stores. It's a professional product. It's not restricted use, but it is really effective on skunk and sewer vine at extremely low concentrations of like 0.15% volume to volume. Okay, that is like a teaspoon, per gallon or something like that. It's an extraordinarily small amount of the herbicide, and skunk vine and sewer vine are very sensitive to Milestone herbicide. The other one, the clopyralid, the active ingredient there, is also more readily available. So it can selectively control skunk vine and sewer vine. And so then that one is effective and has been utilized in a lot of landscape situations for plants that can tolerate clopyralid type applications. What was the other one? Strangler fig or strangler vine?
The strangler vine and then the Caesar weed, yeah.
Okay, so this, I honestly have never done research on controlling strangler vine if we're talking about the strangler fig. I'm assuming that's what we're talking about there.
They have in parentheses milky sap.
Okay, yeah, that's probably the ficus. I have not tried to control that one. The milky sap makes it very difficult to control. Based upon its growth form, repeatedly cutting it back as it's attempting to make its way to the ground may be, one approach to that. I have never tried it, and I have never had to kill it before. And so I don't have a ton of confidence in that answer. But I know that plants that have super milky sap like that, cut stem treatments are very difficult because they're bleeding so much you can't get herbicide into them. And a foliar treatment on that is going to be almost impossible because of, the plant it's growing on. There could be very difficult to actually treat it that way. So I'm going to have to chalk myself up for a big fail on that answer right there. And the last one there, which is an annual species, name it again and I'll tell you.
The Caesar weed?
Yeah, Caesar weed. Yeah, Urina lobata. So Caesar weed is an annual plant, reproduces by seed only. So first and foremost, stop it by flowering, hand pull it if you can, and dispose anywhere. The burrs, they attach like Velcro to everything, which you've probably all discovered by now. So if you can hand pull before they get those burrs, pile it, dispose of it, burn it. That's probably a good start. If you have a dense cover of it, 2,4-D herbicides are extremely effective on it, and so they can be utilized. A number of the auxin herbicides like glyphosate or 2,4-D triclopyr are very effective on it, or glyphosate you can spray it that way. If you can hand pull it, by all means hand pull it before it flowers and before it produces the Velcro like burrs.
Okay, and also for all the attendees, Rachel has put a link up for IFAS that you can find control methods for invasive plants here, for aquatic and invasive plants, so that might help on some of these questions. And then I had one last question, just suggestions for getting rid of invasive sword fern.
Invasive sword fern. Okay, yeah. So like the tuberous sword fern. So that one, I've seen very good results with glyphosate at a 2% solution. It requires a couple of treatments, but that's probably been the most effective way. If you can hand pull and get the tubers up in your hand pulling process, that's another nice way to deal with it. That's a lot of work, and a lot of times the rachis breaks off and doesn't come up very easily at all. And so that was one that either has to be dug out or moved to an herbicide type treatment.
Okay. And I know you said the herbicide that you recommend for torpedo at wetlands edge. Can you repeat that just one more time?
Yeah, so glyphosate is probably the safest thing. I mentioned imazapyr, and somebody posted that they've seen a lot of imazapyr damage in the Keys, and yes, that is correct. Imazapyr has lots of soil residual activity. It has been incorporated into some products where people are using it in situations in the Keys that are resulting in a lot of non-target damage. But we can see that anywhere here in Florida, and we've killed oak trees by using imazapyr for torpedo grass near live oaks. So really the safest thing is to stick with the glyphosate approach there. You could try Tiger herbicide, the Sethoxidum option. It's not quite as effective as glyphosate. And so glyphosate is probably still my top choice on that. We just don't have many options at all for torpedo.
Okay, and the very last question, we are coming to an end, is my city is using 2,4-D on the Peruvian primrose willow in the marsh. Is that good?
Yeah, I think that's a decent option. You're likely to see some recovery from that. But with anything, I think you're going to have a little bit of regrowth. So that's definitely that's an acceptable option there.
Awesome. Well, again, I want to thank you, Dr. Enloe, for today's talk. It was a lot of really awesome, good information. And remind all our attendees to be back on here tomorrow. You're going to use the same email has a link for Thursday's sessions. And I can't think of anything else. Wendy, did you have anything to add? You're on mute, Wendy.
That's the phrase of the year. You're on mute, Wendy. Dr. Enloe, thank you so much for being with us and educating us. This is the first time you talked to this, the State Master Gardener Conference, and it will not be the last. We can't wait to hear what the new research has in store for us. I know you all are working so hard, and these are issues that we struggle with almost every day as Master Gardeners. So thank you so much for all the work you do, and thank you for being with us today.
Happy to be here, Wendy, and happy to come back and do it again. So thank you.
All right. Keep up the good work. And everybody, you will get a new set of links and instructions tonight, as well as tomorrow morning. We're going to have a little bit updates for the tech issues. So hopefully we'll go a little bit more smoothly tomorrow. And remember that the Horticulture ID contest is up and available. And weren't you so impressed the way Dr. Enloe just rattled off those botanical names? He's awesome. All right, everybody, we will see you tomorrow. Thank you very much.
Thank you.